Kimberly, the 5-Minute NP. The 5-Minute NP was born out of my belief that small, incremental changes can drastically change the trajectory of your life. Our genes do not have to determine our lifespan. My goal through this podcast is to act as a roadmap that bridges the gap between knowledge and action, leading to you living your healthiest, happiest, longest life. Welcome to the 5-Minute NP podcast.
Hello everyone. On today's episode, Dr. Amy Johnson joins me to discuss her groundbreaking approach to helping people find lasting freedom from unwanted habits via insight rather than willpower, which we all know doesn't work. She discusses how she battled anxiety, panic attacks, and bulimia for years, and even well-trained, well-intentional professionals could not help her break free. Then, she discovered another approach, which she talks about today, that enabled her to break free from all of those habits for good. That same approach is now foundational to her work, and everything she teaches about has helped thousands of people lead a more peaceful, habit-free life. I know what she has to say will help you discover how everything you need to break a habit is already within you. Welcome to the 5-Minute NP podcast.
Yeah. All right. Hi, Amy. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to talk to you today. First of all, I loved your book, The Little Book of Big Change, and I wish I would have read it sooner. It's really impactful. And I thought we could just start with hearing a little bit about you, what you do, and how your own personal experiences led you into this field.
Sure. Well, my own personal experiences definitely led me into this field, as is the case for many people, I know. So I work with people with habits, with anxiety, with really pretty much anything. But I think habits and anxiety are kind of core things that are behind so much of what we struggle with. And I help them find freedom from these things by sharing an understanding that looks at how our brain works, how our mind works. So what our moment-to-moment experience, how it's created and how we can see it in a new way, but also what's there beyond that experience. Mm-hmm. So, we get very caught up in what we think or what we feel, like the what of it, the content of it and the part we experience. Of course we do, because that's the part we experience. But what's really powerful for people is to see, I have a mind that's thinking all the time, and I feel that in the form of feelings, and I act on it in the form of behaviors. But there's something deeper. Like what never changes? If my experience always changes, what is it that's there that's really me that never changes? So when we look toward that place, that's where amazing things happen. We see things in a brand new way, and people find so much freedom from all kinds of things. So that's kind of what I do. I do it primarily through an online school called the Little School of Big Change. And I started doing this work. I mean, I got into psychology as starting off in college. I knew I wanted to be a psychologist forever because I just couldn't figure out adults when I was a kid. I just couldn't figure out why adults were so crazy and why they did such crazy things and why they worried all the time and they just seemed to live in their heads so much. And as a little kid, I was just trying to figure that out. And I said, I want to learn about people and what makes them tick. And so I studied psychology, and I kind of went down that traditional path for a while. But then just kind of realized I didn't want to just work with people who were, clinical and the whole way of viewing them that way, as sick and broken, and let's fix you and let's make your experience match what we think your experience should look like, just never really resonated. So that's when I sort of took this other path into more, coaching and kind of sharing the stuff that I share now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do want to dive into your book. It's about how the no willpower approach to breaking any habit and how this approach that you have is so different from traditional therapies and helping people deal with, you talk a lot about habits, but I love how you talked about anxiety and depression because that is also such a big deal and so much in our mind. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about that. And in the book, you give a lot of examples on people, and I just, some people think of a habit as an addiction, but really you're talking about habits from excessive shopping to excessive being on the internet, social media too long. So really, you're talking about everything. You can help people with everything and not just those extreme, addictions or habits. Can you talk about what your approach is to breaking habits and how it is different than traditional therapies?
Yeah, well, the reason that this understanding can cut across whatever the habit is, including, as you mentioned, things like anxiety and depression, which we don't think of as habits. We don't talk about them as habits. But the reason why I do and why this helps for any habit is because it's looking at a deeper place than, it's not looking at behavior. If we look at behavior, we end up with Overeaters Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous and this anonymous and that anonymous. That's all at the level of behavior. It's looking deeper than that. It's looking even deeper than the content of what we think and what we feel. So I think traditional therapy, if you look at the level of what we think and feel, you'd be in, CBT or DBT or something to deal with, feelings and then see that your thinking isn't all true and kind of digging in things at that level. But it would be a very different treatment for all of those things you just mentioned. It might be the same sort of therapy, but it would look and feel a very different way because there'd be a lot about the content of your experience. So where I look is this level of how it's really universal. I mean, helping people see the universal ways that all humans work. Every single one of us, and what is behind every single habit, every anxiety, every bit of depression, is that we by nature are healthy and resilient and whole just as we are, and we're feeling experience brought to life through us. And when we feel that experience brought to life through us, again, we're so conditioned to get caught up in what the experience is. Before, we don't even do this on purpose, but we instantly think, oh no, I feel anxious, this is bad. And now our mind's looking for more anxiety. Do I have an anxiety problem? Well, if your mind's looking for one, it will find one. And so now we have an anxiety problem, right? And now we're off medicating something or spending hours and hours in therapy talking about something that truly was a moving through safe experience. Same with any habit, anything really. So it's really quite huge if you look at it in terms of, like, if you imagine an iceberg where like a behavior is the tip of the iceberg, the part we all see. A little deeper is like thoughts and feelings. That's where I think a lot of traditional therapy nowadays is. Even deeper than that is just this bigger understanding of what are humans? How do we work? And seeing that our experience is actually totally safe. When we see that, we let it move through us without getting in the way and freaking out about it so much.
Well, I love what you say is so true. We seriously think about our thinking too much. And I have just really been thinking about this because you are so right. I like get so deep in my thoughts, and you're right. And I want you to talk about this in a minute, how you talk about the difference between kids and adults. And that was so great to hear. And you're so right. How kids, it just comes and goes and they're not thinking about anything, but adults, we sit and obsess about our own thoughts and they become so intrusive for us. And another thing you mentioned is, the more you think about not doing something, the more you end up doing it. And you are so right. Like if I'm like, I am not going to, drink a soda or whatever, I'm not doing that. That's exactly what I want to do. And I don't stop thinking about it until I go get it. And that is so true.
Yes, both of those are huge. So the child thing, it's just the best illustration I can imagine, because we all have been children. We all know children. And we all look at children and say, aren't they so resilient? It's amazing. Yet we have the exact same level of resilience. The only difference is exactly what you said. Like, we sit around and say, I can't believe I thought that. Why am I feeling this way? When am I going to snap out of this? And then we do all these little fix-it things, like take our meds or do our techniques or whatever to try to bring us back. And kids just skip that whole middleman. They just feel what they feel.
Right.
It's done because they're not freaking out about it. It just moves right through and they're on to the next. And that's where resilience comes from. It's in all of us. We don't outgrow it. We just think over it. And the piece about like telling ourselves, you know, like I'm not going to do that. And the more we think about it, that's really kind of what I mean by the no willpower approach is willpower. And everyone knows this, you know, willpower is helpful at times for sure, but it's in very limited supply. Like we don't have an endless supply of willpower. And if you think about it, if you decide I'm not going to have that soda today, what you have to do is bring this up in your head and in a way kind of hold on to it. Like, no, I'm not going to have this soda. So of course you're thinking about it all the time. And you're in a battle, which just never feels good. Now you're in this battle. So as soon as you get tired, your mind gets tired of fighting, which it will.
Right.
And you think, oh, great, I lost the willpower game. I guess I have to have the soda. Right. But, you know, understanding at a deeper level is what allows us to not have to do this whole willpower fight thing. If we could see that our thoughts about our habits or ourselves or our feelings or whatever, they come and go and they want to move through us exactly like we see them do in kids. They just want to be there, be brought to life and flow down the river. That's how all experience works when we don't get in the way. Right. Then it's like, why would I fight with that? Why would I jump in there and try to wrestle this thought to the ground and beat it down and be stronger than it and all of that when I can just start to see, oh, it's just a thought, and then it just moves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you really do. You say, you know, you're giving way too much attention to these thoughts, and we're giving way too much power to these thoughts. And in your book, you talk about how that our habit is really just in our mind, and these urges to do things are really just thoughts.
Yeah. And it's, you know, that's absolutely true. And it's so funny because it's like, it sounds so simple, you know, but I mean, we should acknowledge that all humans, we live in this sea of thinking that we've been living in our whole lives. So it's understandable. I don't want anybody to feel bad. Like, oh, it's just a thought. I should just let it go. It's not that it's always going to be easy because we have been in, it's like having a helmet on. We've had a helmet full of this thinking our whole lives. So we don't even recognize it as a thought anymore. You know, we feel an urge, and I know I did when I was caught up in my habits. I felt an urge, and it was like I was just done for. I felt powerless, and it had so much on me. But truly, I've seen this with thousands and thousands of people now. Like when we truly just slow down, take a step back, like really look at, oh, what is a thought? It's a little blip of energy with some words attached, moving through us. When we see that it really does, it comes to life. And yes, it brings physical sensations, it brings emotions. There's a whole high definition, like super interactive show going on, right, with our thoughts. But still, they move. Like they are designed to come and go and ebb and flow. And we start to get a feel for how thought moves like that. Then yes, it's like, oh, this thing I'm calling a habit or chronic depression or whatever it is, it's just thought.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what you went through and what habit you broke free from?
Yeah, I've had several, but my big habit, my big one is when I wrote the book, I was a few years away from a binge eating bulimia habit. And again, it might sound weird to people to even hear that as a habit, but that's just how I see it now. As I would have all these thoughts about. I would first of all just feel uncomfortable, you know, as we all do at times. So it's just this sense of like not okay in my skin, just a sense of discomfort. Sometimes it felt like anxiety. It could feel like boredom. It could be anything. But we don't. This is kind of in a human way. Like we don't feel well. And we know, and I knew, okay, this isn't right. Like everything in our design, everything in our being is like trying to pull us back home to a feeling of peace. So it gets our attention when we don't feel well. So we reach for things and try to get back home. And they're bad choices, but they're the best we can see to do in the moment. So for me, it became this thing of first not feeling well, and then I was going to exercise more, and I was going to diet, and I was going to have all my food go a certain way. And then of course my brain said, whoa, you're going way too extreme. We got to pull you over here. So it started going to the opposite end, right? And then I was just wanting all this food, which is a well-working brain. Like, amazing that it did that, because I was trying to hold it down at this end of starvation and restriction. And look, it came to try to help me from that. It's just that it swung to the other end. And so I was in that cycle of so much up and down thinking for a long time, for about 8 years. And, trying all the things, all the willpower, all the everything, all the therapies and everything you can imagine. And after 8 years of that, trying everything, really like kind of coming across these ideas that we're talking about of, oh, your brain has just been trained to kind of give these extreme thoughts out. When you don't feel well, there's like an alarm in your brain that says, oh, go eat a bunch of food. That'll help. And because I've been in this thinking forever, I just believed it. But to have that bit of space where I'm like, oh, that's a thought. And if I don't act on that thought, it's going to go away. That was huge. And after 8 years of trying everything, I mean, within a matter of weeks, this habit was gone, and I knew it was gone forever.
That honestly is amazing. And like you said in the beginning, it does sound like it's just too good to be true. But I want you to talk about how our brain can do this. I love how you say our brain's just trying to protect us. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about neuroplasticity. And I love in the book how you talk about the upper and lower brain. And I think it would be so great for people to really understand that, to see really how this does play out and how you can make these changes pretty quickly by understanding that.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's most helpful is seeing that, like I think we mentioned before, everything our brain does is good. It's trying to help us. Like, our brain doesn't mess up. All of its functions are perfectly designed, right? We just misunderstand them, and that's not our fault either. Like, no one taught us this stuff, right?
Right.
So your lower brain is all about consistency and habit, and it needs to be efficient, because it's the old part of your brain that's just trying to alert you to woolly mammoths that might eat you, that we don't have today. But if there's no woolly mammoth, it'll alert you to something, and you'll make up something to worry about, because that's just what it does.
It's true.
But it's, so it's just sending out those signals, and they feel like a matter of life and death, because at one point for humans they were. Mm-hmm. And it's just, it has to be incredibly efficient and consistent to keep us alive. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of the part of the brain that gets wrapped up in our habits. So, I would feel really bad and then go eat a whole half gallon of ice cream. And on some level, all that bad thinking and worry and feeling would be numbed by all that fast sugar hitting my system. And my lower brain was like, ooh, this looks like survival. We just took her from this horrible feeling to a nicer feeling. Mm-hmm. Now, our lower brain, that's not very wise, but to a machine, a old machine like a lower brain, it makes some sense, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like our lower brain kind of learns gets conditioned and just learns, here's what we do. When you feel this way, here's what you do. Mm-hmm. Now, we all have that, and it's really, really helpful, and it's never going to go away. But the problem just is in misunderstanding it, because I would notice that and think, wow, I have a problem. I have no self-control. I have to be harder on myself. I need to, get on medication, like all of this stuff that's just so, if we could just understand how that works, it's so easy. So even with a lower brain saying it's a matter of life and death, you must have that drink or buy that thing or whatever, we can come to see, oh, when I feel gripped like that, it's only and always showing me one thing. It's just showing me that my brain thinks it's protecting me. But we all know better. If we can, when our mind clears a little bit, we know there's no shoes we have to buy. There's no drink we have to have, or else we're going to die. It just doesn't work that way.
Right. So then the upper brain is the part that's kind of the conscious decision-making part that's telling your lower brain, no, that's not a good idea. You don't have to have that. Yeah, it's kind of, I think we can say that. I think that's accurate. Like the higher brain or the upper brain is definitely wiser. It's less less like animalistic in that sense. And
And I would say even bigger than the brain in a sense. So like we, obviously everything comes through our brain as human beings, but in an almost bigger spiritual way too. It's like we're lived by common sense. We just make choices in the moment. Like we see what to do when we need to see what to do. When we aren't caught up in a lower brain screaming at us,
Right.
like things show up for us. And yeah, I think they show up through that higher brain.
I'm glad you brought up spirituality, because you talk about that in a lot of the beginning of the book. And I thought, and you kind of started to learn about these 3 principles that you call was the universal mind. And that's kind of really, it sounded like where you started to learn about all this. Can you just briefly talk about that?
Yeah, it was, what it was for me is kind of initially seeing what we just talked about around the brain, like, oh, when my brain screams at me to eat food, it's just a machine that's conditioned to do that. And then when I kind of saw a bit about the spiritual side of things, yeah, it put all that into a much even bigger context, which was that as humans, like we are connected to this bigger life source that is incredibly wise. It's the same thing energizing and powering us is what's spinning the planets and changing the seasons. Like it knows what to do. It does that through us. And when we don't get in the way so much in our brains and minds and try, when we aren't so in our head where it's like, I know the best way, I know what I should eat, when we're not doing all that stuff, in a bigger sense, truly, we are just lived. Like things show up and we have common sense and we just do what we need to do in a moment without having to work it all out. And we are healthy by nature and our mind just thinks we aren't. So I love just knowing that health and resilience and all of that, it's baked into our design. And just by some innocent misunderstandings, we end up, looking over it.
Yeah, I love that you talk about like we weren't born with this habit. I mean,
Yeah.
So I also want to talk about, which I think is good to understand, is intellectual understanding and insight. And how does knowing this affect our ability to break a habit?
Yeah. So everything we're saying here, like some of it may be new for people, probably for people, this isn't even new, but there's a huge, huge, huge difference between intellectually understanding what we're saying, how it works, and experiencing it and knowing it and living it from a deeper place, and I think that's what it's all about. So like when I, again, initially had my insight around, oh, this is just my conditioned brain telling me to do this and I don't have to listen. I mean, I've said those words to probably 100,000 people in my life. And for some of them, they have a similar experience that I had. Like it was huge light bulb and within weeks, the habit's gone. For others, nothing, they're just words, So I think it's just kind of good that what we're talking to, even as we have a conversation, our brain is very engaged. And this isn't stuff that our brain can get it, obviously, but it's not for the brain to take and then try to help us from there. It's more what you just said, that we weren't born with these habits. So it's more about looking to that place that's already habit-free, because that's alive and well in all of us. The habit is only in our mind. So if it's like, okay, yes, my mind goes here and my mind does this and worries about that and whatever, but I know that's just a machine in my head doing that. And when I get quiet, I can feel where I'm habit-free and I'm peaceful all the time. That makes sense? So that's sort of like when we touch that place, and we all do all the time, just in little moments. Like it's not, it's not always a big light bulb going off kind of thing. I mean, often it's just like a little moment of peace in your day where you notice that you're just very present. That's us. We don't have habits when we're feeling that way. We don't feel anxious when we're that way. It's only when this mind starts revving up that we say, ooh, I feel anxious, or I'm thinking about my thing or whatever.
Yeah. Can you seem like you spent a lot of time talking about understanding habits in the book, which I think is So good. Can you talk about why that first step is so crucial to breaking the habit? Is understanding their habit or our habit?
It's everything. It's all there is, I think, because again, we're not looking at that level of behavior. So it's not like there's something to do. Like there's no steps. There's nothing to do, like it's not like, oh, eat less or, don't like the cigarette. Everybody knows that stuff. Like we know we know the behavioral steps to take to break a habit. Right. Even with anxiety, there may not be behavioral steps, but we can tell ourselves which is the equivalent probably there, like everything's okay, you're safe, you're not going to die. Mm-hmm. It's just shallow. It doesn't go very deep for people.
Right.
But it's kind of your same question around insight versus intellectual understanding, right? Like when we deeply understand it, not mentally understand it, but deeply see that we are 100% healthy and habit-free right now. The only thing that makes you think you're not is a little tape playing in your head that says there's a problem. And then we believe it, or a little tape saying, oh no, life is dangerous. And then we feel anxiety and we think that's real and us and stable. And it isn't. It's just habitual firing in our brain. That's it, but like, so that understanding it piece, that's kind of really like insightfully understanding it. Mm-hmm. That's how this stuff changes.
I think you talked about these destructive habits as not being self-sabotage. And I really think that's important for people to understand what you're talking about because, you're trying to break a habit and then, it's true, you go back to it or you do something and I know I tear myself up about it. So how is, going back to that or the destructive habits in itself, not self-sabotage?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, it's kind of to that level of understanding. So we do the best we can do in any given moment mm-hmm. with what we see in that particular moment. So people who have children who have lost their temper with their children, which is probably everyone, right?
Right.
You just have so much going on and then you're worried about this and thinking about that and the TV's blaring and the kids are screaming and all this stuff comes out of your mouth. Mm-hmm. And from all of that we were just weighed down in, that was the best we could see to do to just let that out. And then we felt a tiny bit better. Is it a good thing to do? No. Is it what we wanted to do? No. The second our mind clears, we see, oh, I could have handled that differently, but we kind of couldn't have handled it differently or else we would have. We see that when our mind clears. We didn't see it in the middle of all that or else we would have had different options available to us.
Right.
So the whole self-sabotage thing, it's like someone saying, well, I know better. I know binge eating's bad for me. Why do I keep doing it? I must hate myself. I must be sabotaging myself. No, you know better right this minute, intellectually, as we're talking about it. Right. But in the moment, like it's the only thing you can see to do to get closer to home. So it's not like we hate ourselves or we're hurting ourselves, but what helps with that is the more we see overall about who we truly are, and we come to get really sensitive to our feelings, meaning the worse we feel, rather than just having it build and build and build and then coming out as a yelling at our kids or binge eating or whatever. It's like we start to feel that build up and we know, oh, I'm in my head. My head is starting to really ramp up. This isn't me. None of the stuff I'm thinking right now is accurate. It's just a busy mind. And then we remember, oh yeah, this just settles down on its own. There's this sense, that's not a thing we do, but it's a bigger knowing. It's like just so hard to describe because it just becomes very natural, but you start to feel bad and you just know, oh, I'm caught up, and it just starts to kind of release. Mm-hmm. Then that's when it's much easier to kind of just feel hijacked by a habit and just kind of let it move through you.
I think it's good how you say like the habit is not personal. It's not, it's not you. And this voice you're hearing is not you either.
Yeah. It's just the workings of the machine. and it's, the machine is, meaning the brain, is is designed to make it all sound like, have it all sound like it is about us. I mean, it's literally like what the left brain language storyteller part of our brain, it refers everything back to this person called me. It's just how it talks. And so everything we do in life and our whole lives start to look in a way like they're all about us. Even how we say it, my life and my day and my habit, as if we own all this stuff.
Right.
But, you know, we kind of take a bigger step back and it's like, it's just experience kind of living through us. It's not ours.
Yeah. But what I was going to say is, in the book, you talk about like when you have a dream, it's so real. And you wake up and you realize, oh, that didn't really happen.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, I loved how you talked about that, because it really is like, oh yeah, no, it's not even real. This isn't really happening, and how you can change your mind just like that. So I love how you talk about thoughts are fleeting, urges are fleeting, and if you don't act on them, they'll just go away, which seems like it's so hard to do in the moment. And that if you really just don't do it, it's really just going to go away. Yeah.
Well, it is, but there's kind of a catch. Like we can't turn that into a to-do, because that's what willpower is. Just don't do it. Right. Yeah. So if we just don't do it at all, if what matters is what we do, and we say, okay, I'm going to feel this and I'm just going to white knuckle through it and I'm not going to do it, that's not going to work. It's definitely not going to work long-term. It might work short-term. But it is true that if we don't act on these urges and we let them move through, they go away. 100% true. The key is seeing how this all works. Again, it's that insightful understanding of it. When we just come to deeply, deeply, truly see, wow, my mind's talking about all kinds of stuff, and that's not me. And I don't need to attend to it all. Just because my mind tells me to do something, I don't need to do it. It's just what a lower brain talks about. Then there's just this space and stuff shows up and it goes away. And before long, any thought that comes up and doesn't get any attention from us, it's not going to come up much longer, because that's the whole kind of neuroplasticity piece, right? Like whatever we focus on, pay attention to, it strengthens. What we don't, doesn't. But we can't reverse engineer it. Like we can't just set out to make it happen that way very easily. It's so much deeper and easier and long lasting when we truly see it in a different way.
Well, how do you end the habit? You kind of talk about how to end the habit and how to handle setbacks.
Yeah. Setbacks are so normal. So like, they're just part, like, I don't even, I use that word in the book, but like, I can't even see it as a setback. It's absolutely no different than saying like a baby who's learning how to walk falls down and you're like, oh, he's trying, but he had a setback today. That's not a setback. That's how you learn to walk. And, truly, like it's just from a brain level, like our brain is very habituated to give us these urges over and over again, and we're in the habit of acting on them. Of course, we're going to act on an urge at some point down the road. Right. So the more we see that that's just part of it, that doesn't mean anything. And the setback, doesn't do anything to us anyway. What hurts us is the story of saying, I knew it. I'm just going to throw in the towel. I knew this wasn't going to work for me. That's the only thing that hurts us, like falling into your habit again doesn't.
Right. Yeah, you're right. I mean, you dwell on that, and that is what's causing the problem. Instead of just saying, oh, well, start over, let's go. You sit and dwell on it. How do you, when you're coaching people, do you feel like, how can they really make these changes lifelong?
Well, the more they see, it's hard to make a change in a lifelong way, because that kind of implies like we're doing something. Do you know what I mean? Like what happens for the people I work with is we don't even start by talking all that much about their habit or their problem. We look at how life works, and when they start seeing, whoa, I'm not acting like a little kid anymore. I'm not like letting my experience move through me. Every thought and feeling that shows up, I jump on it and I have a story about it and I hang on to it. When they start to insightfully see that for themselves, they stop doing that, because they just really see, whoa, that doesn't make any sense, Right. And so when we stop doing that and we really see how things work in a deeper way, I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but it just, our understanding kind of just takes on momentum, and it just doesn't make sense to do this stuff. So I think in that book, it might have been in my book, Being Human. I think it was in my other book, but there's the story of the rope that Byron Katie told in one of her books, but I think it's older than that even, of a woman who's hiking up in the mountains, and she sees, I just kind of gave it away, but she sees a rattlesnake and she's scared to death of this rattlesnake, and she's sure she's about to die because there's nowhere to back up and get away.
Right.
And then she looks closer and it's a rope, right?
Yeah.
So when she deeply sees it's a rope, she cannot go back to all that fear. Like there's no chance in heck she's going to turn around and run. It's a rope, and she knows it now. A minute ago, she was ready to run, but it's not going to happen now.
Right.
That's what this is like. It's like when we just see our experience, like when you almost can't be afraid of your own experience, or you can't see it as personal in the same way that you used to. And so everything kind of just unravels from there.
Yeah. Well, I know you coach a lot of clients. Is there one particular client that impacted you the most, or that really affected you, that just seeing how your work changed their life?
There are so many. There's one woman I love. She's in our little School of Big Change community. I love them all, but she has just such a fascinating story of, for years and years, caring for her elderly father. I think he had dementia. And she was in a ton of anxiety. And so often her mind would just go to, I'm not going to be okay when he dies. Like when something happens to him, it wasn't really an if, eventually he was going to die. Right. And her mind just would spin these stories. And she thought that was the whole basis for her anxiety and all of that. And so for, 10, 15 years, as she cared for him, she just lived in this. And toward the end of his life, she came across this understanding and really deeply saw that all of that what if thinking was like just a tape. I mean, it had nothing truly to do with her or her dad or her life or her future. Like really deeply saw that. It's like thinking there's a leak and then realizing, oh, it's just raining on me. This whole time I've had it way wrong, right? So she really woke up to that. And shortly after coming across this understanding, he did die. And she came on one of our calls and just had the most amazing experience of his death. It was beautiful, and it felt nothing like she thought it would. And she was so grateful for their time that they had together. I mean, it was like complete 180 from what her mind told her all that time, because she could actually experience it rather than just experience this tape saying this is what it's going to be like. She was there in the truth of it. And in the truth of it, nothing is horrible. Even death, really, it can be so beautiful without all our stories about it.
Wow, that's true. That's powerful. I love your last chapter of your book. You talk about living in the present, and really that's all we can do. And you are so right. And I'm learning so much about just being more mindful and living in the present. And also in your final thoughts, you talked about really learning from our struggles. And I just thought that was really good too. Like we really, even when things seem so bad and we're going through such a hard time, I think you had a friend that said, you were going through some things, and she said, well, what positive's coming out of this? And you're like, what? I mean, what possibly could be coming out of this? And I think that was so good, because it's true, even when we're going through those hard times, and there really is things that are positive and teaching us and truly making us who we are.
Yeah. And we don't usually see them at the time, and that's okay. So that's the best part, right? It's like, just to know you're not going to know that in the moment. You're most likely, like, you're just not going to see it in real time. But when you can look back and you can zoom out and look at the big picture and know that, how many people do we all know who say getting cancer was the best thing that ever happened to them, or getting laid off from their job was the best thing that ever happened to them, or, the things that are that we're most afraid of.
Right.
We don't see it until we see it. But if we can kind of assume there is something good in everything, whether we see it or not, then it's, then you're going to suffer. We're going to all suffer in life.
Right.
But we kind of know in the back of our minds, okay, this isn't just for suffering's sake. Like there's something bigger in this.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought that was so good. So talk a little bit about your School of Change and how people can become a part of that. Like, what do you do with the School of Change? What do people expect?
Yeah. Well, it starts with a 6-week course, and I run that twice a year. So there's one coming up in September, and then I run it in the spring as well. And it's a 6-week course, but it's really a community. It's a global community. There are people from 43 countries in our school right now, and we all gather. And for 6 weeks, we go through a curriculum that I created that really walks people through this understanding we've been talking about. And it's really tested, so kind of designed and tested so that it helps people have their own insights. So it's not just knowledge. It's not about the knowledge at all. It's about having a real felt deep experience that you are okay, that you are habit free, that your thoughts aren't you, and all of that good stuff. And little by little, we walk through it together. I have 2 calls each week, so I'm there kind of coaching people personally and guiding them through it. And there are people that come in. Some people are just curious about the understanding, but most people that come in really are kind of like I was, like they've tried everything. They're struggling with a habit. They've done all the things, or with anxiety, some form of anxiety. Those are the 2 most common. They've done everything, and this allows them to just look in a completely different direction. Like there's no doing, like let's just go through this experience and see what's already true. And just incredible things change for people. I mean, it's so amazing. And people learn so much from each other. I don't do so much one-on-one coaching anymore. I really kind of keep things in that school because I see the benefit in that. So you might have a, eating related habit. Someone else has panic attacks. Watching them, what they see about their panic attacks and how they're being coached through it, it shows us stuff about our experience. And it's almost easier to see it in them because it's less, it's not like me and my problem. You're kind of casually listening, and then you like have all these insights. So yeah, it's really incredible.
Yeah, I think you're right. That community support, and just to help you sustain it, that's the support. That's awesome. And I know you have a podcast, and I love the name, Changeable. And so where can people find out more about your podcast, what you talk about, and is it interviewing, or is it just more like insight, and where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, my podcast is, it's a mix. So roughly every other episode, one episode will be just me sharing for a bit. And then I'll have either a change story, like the woman I talked about, Diane, her whole story is on one of my podcasts, or an interview. And all of my stuff is at my website, dramyjohnson.com.
Yeah, that's good. So what I usually ask, a final question is, what impact do you want to have on the world? But for you, I think I just want to know, what is one thing that people can do today to break free from their habit? Start the process.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I think the biggest thing we can do is just be curious about that part of you that doesn't have the habit. Yeah. Because we get so caught up in, I did this many times this week, and I'm, it's such a problem. But there are so many moments in every single day when people don't have their habit. They don't have their addiction. Like they just feel okay for a minute. It's nowhere to be found. And in those moments, that is you. That is what's true. That's what's always there. The rest is a bunch of mental activity that we get caught up in that we think is us. Yeah. So that starts to kind of flip the scales a bit. It points us back toward what is true and stable and never changing. And it points us away from all this chatter and mental activity that's always changing.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, I feel like your book was really calming and kind of like truly like really, once you have insight to all that, I can see how it can be totally life-changing, because I even noticed with myself, it's like, no, you really start to even just become more self-aware, more about, no, that is a part for me. And and I know you have another book coming out. When can we expect it, and what is it about?
It should be September of 2021, so just about a year from now. And the what's it about seems like such an easy question. It's actually a hard question, but it's a lot around that difference, what I just kind of summed up, like the part of us that's really us, and then helping us really see this is what a mind does. This is what a brain does. This is what a mind does. Because when we see that and we're like, oh, that's just what my mind does, that's not me, it gets so much easier to not be tangled up in it.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, I'll look forward to that one. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thank you. It's a great conversation. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And good luck with everything.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.